Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are tackling what's basically the ultimate corporate boogeyman, the unknown. Mastering organizational risk isn't about hiding from the dark. It's really about turning on the lights and equipping yourself with a strategic toolkit so you can actually navigate your company's future. So, I want you to ask yourself honestly right now, do you really know your company's threats? Or are you maybe just guessing based on past experiences? Look, operating a business without a risk map is an absolute recipe for disaster. It's simple. If you can't see the threat, you can't manage it, and you certainly won't survive it. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our strategic roadmap for today. We'll be looking at the risk challenge, risk identification strategies, the heat map, the action map, your risk appetite, and finally, making all of this a continuous process. All right, section 1, the risk challenge, operating without a map. Let's just establish a baseline truth right out of the gate. Risk is entirely inevitable, but you absolutely cannot manage it with pure intuition alone. Trusting your gut? Well, that might work for picking a spot for lunch, but it leads to absolute chaos when you're dealing with complex, enterprise-level threats. I'm talking about things like cyber attacks or sudden supply chain failures. To survive, we literally have to move from abstract fears to a very concrete, visual framework. Moving right along to section 2, risk identification strategies, the hunt. Because obviously, before we can map anything out, we actually have to uncover it first. And there's no single magic bullet here. Getting a complete picture requires a combined approach. So you might start with foundational risk inventories, then maybe move to dynamic workshops and targeted employee interviews. You'll want to map out process flows, and definitely comb through past loss event data. Basically, you're trying to catch what standard brainstorming always misses. For example, by visually mapping out the exact inputs, outputs, and participants in a workflow, say the journey of a physical product from a supplier's factory all the way to your customer's doorstep, you can pinpoint exactly where things might break down. It is an incredibly effective way to identify deeply detailed operational risks that a standard high-level boardroom chat would definitely overlook. Which brings us to section 3, the heat map, measuring probability versus impact. Okay, now that we've identified our risks, we must measure them. On a traditional heat map, we plot the probability of an event happening right against the severity of its impact. It cleanly classifies your threats. See those down in the green? Low priority. But those items clustered up there in the dark red top right corner, things like a major data breach without offsite backups, yeah, those are critical and they demand immediate management attention. Next up, section 4, the action map, inherent risk versus preparedness. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it introduces a slightly more novel tool that changes the perspective entirely by looking at vulnerability. The action map actually weighs your inherent risk exposure against your team's real preparedness, dividing things into 4 specific quadrants. You test, where you are highly prepared for high risk, but the real danger zone, that's the improve quadrant. That's where you are highly exposed but poorly prepared. It immediately highlights where your defenses are just too weak. So you might be wondering, how do these two models compare? Well, both can be built using qualitative or quantitative data. The heat map on the left is widely used, it's pretty standard in the discipline, and it's incredibly easy to grasp. However, the action map on the right, while it definitely requires a lot more detailed internal data to build, it easily identifies your management priorities and tells you exactly what to do about different risks. To summarize the contrast cleanly, the heat map visually flags criticality. It basically tells you what is dangerous. The action map, on the other hand, is dynamic. It dictates direct mitigation by measuring exactly how equipped your team actually is to face that danger. All right, on to section 5, your risk appetite, the psychology of strategy. Here is a crucial twist for you. Risk mapping isn't just about cold, objective data. It's actually deeply tied to corporate psychology. Risk appetite is the specific level of risk your organization is actually willing to accept to achieve its goals before you start spending resources to reduce it. To put that into perspective, a fast-moving tech startup is naturally going to have a massive risk appetite compared to, say, a century-old, highly regulated bank. The widely accepted international standard, ISO 31000, defines this as the amount and type of risk that an organization is willing to pursue, retain, or take. This forces some really profound internal reflection. What threats will you consciously assume, and what are you going to pay heavily to transfer or just eliminate completely? This whole philosophy builds into 4 distinct strategic stances. Think about your own company right now. Are you prone, showing a high willingness to roll the dice for a big payoff? Are you tolerant, accepting reasonable risks for steady growth? Are you adverse, playing a much more conservative defense? Or are you completely intolerant to any operational variables whatsoever? You absolutely have to know where you stand.
Finally, Section 6, a continuous process, the evolution of management.
To look at the long-term big picture here, risk management is never just a one-time workshop. You don't build a heat map once and then just frame it on the wall in the boardroom, right? Threats change, markets shift, and internal structures are constantly evolving. Because of this, your frameworks must be dynamic, living processes. They need to be revisited at least annually to validate those old risks and, of course, to discover new ones. Which leaves us with a final, lingering thought today. What is your organization's true risk appetite? And are you genuinely prepared for the unknown? Look, don't let your company operate in the dark. Take these visual models, map out your vulnerabilities, and really take control of your strategy. Thanks for learning with me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.